everybody, this is miniGIRL with Hobby Hot Tips. Today's topic, wet palettes. I went from thinking a wet palette was just a useless suggestion to now I almost use it every single time I paint. When I first began painting, I thought it was just a waste of time because honestly I didn't understand the purpose of it. Let me show you why it's a great tool to improving your painting and how I make mine. First off, I use a container. Mine just happens to be glass, but I do recommend a Tupperware plastic one along with a lid that fits it. It must be large enough to fit wet wipes in it. If you don't have wet wipes, unscented baby wipes is fine. And the reason I prefer wipes over using just a regular wet paper towel is because wipes come with preservatives in them, meaning it'll keep your palette preserved longer. It also helps avoid buildup of microbes and bacteria, and I just don't want to breathe that when I open up the lid, especially because I live in a very moist, humid area. If you insist on using a wet paper towel, that's fine. I do recommend maybe adding just like a touch of dish soap or hand soap to it, just so you know it's better on your lungs. So place the wipes inside your container, and I add just a little bit of distilled water. Bottled water is fine, as long as it's distilled, because anything with added minerals can speed up your paint kind of going sour. If your paint has a weird type of smell or very strong, then it's probably bad. Also, it might help it clump up more too, and you don't want that. Ultimately, the reason for a wet palette is to contain paints so that they don't dry up while you're painting, as well as allowing you to create custom colors for highlighting and saving them. It can be really hard to recreate those custom colors sometimes. You also want to keep your paints cooled. This is another reason that I didn't know why wet palettes were so great. That way, it doesn't dry out, which is the main reason for the wet palette. You don't want to know how long I was painting before I discovered that important fact. When I'm painting, I do have the tendency to make little circles of swirl of color on my palette, and some people have the tendency to do lines or stripes. For those of you who like to keep the colors more separate, like yours truly, may I recommend using a mini Muffin liner, which is made of parchment paper, placed right on top of your wet palette. Yes, they do come in plain white, so guys, don't worry. I just happen to pick the pretty flower ones. Here's my palette from almost 2 weeks ago. I wanted to keep my custom color blend separate from the blue, so I used a separate mini cupcake liner. Here's a hot tip. Use the lines, the crevices of the liner to your advantage when getting paint onto your brush. I just simply twirl mine inside that line, and it acts as a guide to make the perfect point on my brush, and then I'm ready to paint. For those that prefer lines of color or their colors just kind of all mixed together, just place a piece of parchment paper cut to the size of your Tupperware, not wax, because if you use wax paper, it's too slippery and your paint will start to slosh around and just make one big puddle. Another reason I like to use the wipes is because it acts as a cleaner for my brush in between dipping. So if I get my paint on it and I just wipe off the paint right directly onto the wet wipe, it also helps keep my brush nice and moist too. Another hot tip that some of you probably know about, but I would like to share, is when I'm done painting, I put the lid on and I store it right into the refrigerator. Not the freezer, I just want to clarify. And doing this has actually had my paint last almost a whole month. So it's a great method. It also saves you some money too on paint. If you don't have a palette, you can use an ice tray, you can use an egg carton, you can use a mini muffin tin, anything you want. Another way you can paint is to take just a regular cheapy palette that you buy and put foil on your palette. When it gets full, just rip off the foil and toss it. You've probably seen a lot of the famous artists and YouTubers do this. You can make this a wet palette also, by just getting a bowl of ice, placing your palette right on top. Boom, wet palette. To preserve your paint, you can either put a piece of plastic over it or a lid, and goes right into the refrigerator. Now, if you don't believe me, at least try a wet palette once. If you hate it, don't do it. At least you'll know that you've tried it. I gave it a shot after months of criticizing the idea, and now I'm a true believer. Also, side note, be sure to check out WarbossTae and Tabletop Minions YouTube channels. They have great videos on wet palettes, and if you do go there, tell them miniGIRL sent you and I said hi. So make sure to share your wet palette stories or ideas in the comment section below. I love getting your feedback, guys. Thanks again, and see you soon. Until next time, bye.